major explosion. And then I saw this paper falling, and I thought there's a ticker tape parade. Oh my God, I just saw the World Trade Center collapse.
Hi, I'm Andy.
And I'm Roger.
And welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today.
It's a slogan we should put on a t-shirt.
Stop touching her!
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift.
Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
Andy.
You keep doing this to me. I feel like we're like playing tennis and we've both gone to the net. Yeah, we're doing that volley thing. It's not working out for one of us.
Good timing as always. Do you know, like the podcast? How important do you think it is to have a line at the start of a podcast? You know, because I think of some of the ones that I listen to, and they always start the same way, and it's almost like, you know, The Simpsons, and like as soon as you hear that, it invokes a certain emotion, right? And then I was thinking, oh, what's ours? Is it just saying each of our names?
It's Hey Roger, Hey Andy.
Hey Roger, Hey Andy.
Well,
okay.
I've got to when you mentioned that, the first thing that I thought was that we did the 2-part Jerry Seinfeld episode.
Yeah, do it.
And
make the sound.
I did. I don't know if any of our listeners noticed, but I did cut in a Hey Roger, Hey Andy from a different episode just so it wasn't weird. So
it's true though. Like I do think a good little intro jingle definitely helps.
Although to be fair, ours comes in after the
cold open.
Yeah. All right. Today's episode. Actually, Roger, we didn't do a lot of prep this week.
Someone does.
And I hit you with a suggestion 40 minutes before we're here to record, and you were probably expecting me to say, "Oh, we'll do like a
Taylor Swift goes to London."
Bingo, Taylor Swift bingo or something. And I hit you with, let's go back to 2001 and look at September 11. And you said, "What the fuck are you thinking?" No, but I was thinking about this and I thought, oh, maybe it's best that we don't prepare for this kind of an episode, because I think there's actually something in talking about 9/11 in the context of like our completely unfiltered recollection of what happened at the time. Like, because we could go down some rabbit warren and then all we're doing is like regurgitating like some Netflix documentary we watched like a week ago kind of thing. But I think going back and actually thinking about what was that day like for us? So, so we thought we would give it a crack.
It's funny, like I put 9/11 and the attacks on the Twin Towers in New York in a similar category where it freezes and crystallizes what you were doing on that day, in the same category as when Michael Jackson died. Because I both have this memory of almost this out-of-body experience, and I can see myself, like I can see it like a picture playing on an old-timey projector, of me standing where I was and looking at the screen and finding out the news. And it was the same day when Michael Jackson died, right? I was going to work, I was hungover, that's how early it was in my career, and I was standing on George Street when they had a McDonald's there, like an infamous McDonald's that was so seedy, and they had a big plasma TV, and I saw the news. And then I thought to myself, that's how it used to be back in the day, right? Like you didn't have your smartphone always feeding you tweets and Instagram reels and all this stuff. Like you found out news when you heard it on the radio or you walked past like a big screen TV playing current affairs. And it was the same for 9/11. And we were moving from our first family house that I grew up in. And that's what makes the memory even more crystallized for me, that we were full of boxes, we were about to move out, and the last thing that was plugged in was our TV. And it was playing it, and we were all huddled around. There were a couple of people around to help us move, and boxes everywhere, and the TV was on. And the image of the planes crashing into the towers were playing, and I remember my sister next to me just crying. And it was just so shocking, right? Because people of our generation hadn't really seen any, for better or for worse, hadn't seen any of like live footage of this kind of thing before, especially on like American soil. So that's kind of like where I was at the time. And I remember very clearly because of the environment, right? It was the day of the moving day from our family home.
Was this morning or was this evening? What was?
It was in the morning. Yeah, it was very early in the morning. And yeah, we're just all in our rumpus boxes everywhere and the TV there. And I remember the TV too, like back in those days, we're not talking about no flat screen plasma. It was like one of those massive, like think of the old school computer monitors, those CRTs, just like a big one of those, right, in black.
Yeah.
And it was sitting there and we were watching it. And yeah, my sister was crying. Other people just like literally just silent, just this eerie silence where you can hear like the hum of the microphone on the news report. It was that quiet. And it was shocking. And then, but you know what, for me though, like, and why I'm talking about how my sister reacted and what the room was like, is because maybe I didn't react. Like, I knew that I was witnessing something very novel, very new, something that I hadn't experienced before. But I don't think I did react. I think I was like swept up in how novel it was, in the drama of it was. I was like, what happens now? What happens next? What's going to happen, right? Never seen this before. But it didn't affect me initially, I must admit. I was very like out of body in terms of, very meta, like looking at myself, looking at the room, receiving this information.
Yeah, so look, I have some similarities and some differences to what you've said there. First of all, I must admit I kind of a little bit shocked that in your placing of world events that 9/11 and Michael Jackson kind of stand out to you as being of similar. Well, I know you're not suggesting they're of similar magnitude or importance, but just as an event to you, it landed.
Like you remember where you were when you found
it.
Kind of thing,
No, I get it. So like maybe just so we would have been like something like 15 at the time, 15, 16, something that kind of age. Yeah, maybe 16 or something. I can't remember exactly, but like at school still, old enough to kind of get it, but not maybe young enough that this was definitely like the first of. There wasn't. We didn't really have anything. It wasn't like we'd lived through the moon landing and there were things like that or other wars or whatever, fall of the Berlin Wall, that kind of stuff. But so my kind of story is in some ways similar and in some ways quite different. So the similarities is that I also have this like vivid sort of what you were doing, what the background was, like what were you doing on the day. So for me, I'd got a job working in a sports store, and that sports store was opening in like a new shopping center that was just opening. And the whole work at that place had been to set the store up, like get all the goods in because it hadn't opened to the public yet. Yeah. So I had been working at this sports store, like stocking the shelves, putting lots of stuff, out and, anyway, that was work, right? And on I guess it would have been September 11 for us as well, I think. Yeah. So, but like I got home at night and it was like, I probably got home at like 9 o'clock or something, 9 p.m., something like that. And then it was like, I think my brother came out and said, oh, there's like a plane that's gone into the World Trade Center or something. And I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe it was just an accident or something like that. But by that stage, it was like on the TV, like the news channels had sort of transitioned over. And so this is probably where it was a different experience to probably yours in that, like, I was up as it all unfolded, like in real time. So like I was watching it from literally first plane, second plane, first building collapsing, second building collapsing, Pentagon, the other one in that field in Pennsylvania. Yeah. And it was just because it was just like you didn't go sort of half an hour or an hour without there being some new dramatic development. And it just felt like, fuck, what is going on here? And of course you didn't know anything. Like you didn't know what the cause was at the time. Like no one really knew anything about, like you didn't know that the buildings were going to collapse. Like that wasn't on the cards at that time. So I just remember like, it was just this like, I don't know, mesmerizing is the right word, but it was just never ever have I encountered anything even remotely like that in my life before.
Yeah, similar. So I think that, it also says a lot about how traumatic memories are laid down for most humans. And I think overwhelmingly when you talk to people about this kind of stuff, the fact that they remember so much of their environment at the time tells you a little bit how, you lay down these memories, right? Like you whenever someone describes it, they always talk about like they know exactly where they were, how the room felt, how things were set up, who was with them, right? Like, and I think that's like the trauma of it. But I do agree that, it was almost like because we were 15, most of us were 15 or 16 in our kind of cohort, it was probably the earliest age that you can truly absorb something of this nature. Like you are an adult in that way, right? Like, and so it kind of, for our generation, was a little bit of an innocence lost moment, right? Maybe a guilty white privilege innocence lost moment, but that nonetheless, because it kind of took us into this new era of like terrorism, right? And this kind of warfare on ideology, and I think that seeing it, there was something special about seeing it play out in real time in color TV, and this was before social media and before all this kind of stuff, right? So the news cycle was very different. And yeah, I think it was the beginning of a lot of things in terms of that style. How did you feel about the situation in terms of like who was doing it and kind of what it meant? Like, how long did it take for you to kind of connect the dots that actually this was going to kick off a huge kind of chain of events around the war on terror?
I think on the night, like on the day, it was no one had any idea who was behind it. Like that was like part of what made it so unreal and different. Like we've been conditioned now for 23 years or however long after the fact to kind of think of 9/11 as, oh yeah, and then that's the bit where they went to Afghanistan, there's Osama bin Laden, and then that, oh yeah, then they had the Iraq War and all that sort of stuff. But actually at that time, like it could have been anything. Like no one, like you really just had no idea. Like yeah, I think Al Qaeda claimed that they'd done it or whatever, but certainly as you're watching these buildings like on fire and right before you, I mean, not before your own eyes, but it felt like it was before your own eyes because you were watching the live, cameras from New York. And, you obviously didn't know that at that time. So I think that added to the whole intrigue, or not, I don't know if intrigue's the right word, but like maybe the scariness of the situation, because especially when they were reporting that the Pentagon had been hit and it sort of felt like, oh, this is like a little bit more organized than just like, a couple of like hijackers
some lone wolves, right?
Yeah, and there were two buildings, like, so, and to your point before around like technology, so I think what made this different to anything before it was twofold. One was that it was like, now I think, I don't know what the death toll ended up being. It's probably something around the 2000s, something like that. And there've been things that have happened, all around the world in various, natural disasters and things like that. The 2000s actually not necessarily like an outlier. Like these kind of things like this happen. I mean, obviously this was deliberate, so that does make it an outlier in terms of like terrorist incidents and the like. But, like if you had a tsunami or you had an earthquake or you had, whatever, like a flood, like that, this kind of stuff can happen, right? So it wasn't necessarily unusual in that sense, but you almost couldn't plan an event that would have an outsized impact in terms of like literally terror, because you had all the cameras like glued to the buildings, just with enough time for the second plane to go in, so people could watch the second plane go in live, and then you had the building collapse, and then the other building, and it was before smartphones, but a lot of people still had cameras, and the tech was good enough that you got really good quality footage on, certainly watching the news, but then after the fact, as everyone had their, like videoed their own experiences on the day.
Yeah, it was interesting, wasn't it? Because it was a period just before the proliferation of smartphones, but in some ways, the camcorders of that generation and the cameras were better than the first generation smartphone cameras anyway. So they were, especially around optical zoom. So I know I've seen some of the photos, like the videos, where there's actually someone's got like a Sony camcorder, and they've got the 48 times optical zoom, and they're zooming in, and horrible, people jumping out of the buildings and things when they realize what's going on, was all captured, right? And yeah, it just gave this incredible novel feeling of seeing something unfold and, like you said, build. Like, it's like, oh, what next? Is this like a proper coordinated attack that's going to go on and get bigger and bigger and more momentum, right? And it's happening to America. So you have this idea that they're the world power and they would be safe, and they have the biggest and most highly sophisticated intelligence organization in the world and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I think it was just imprinted on society at that point of how unsafe we are in the West, or maybe not as safe as we thought. And I think it's even to this day, like, I was thinking about how attitudes towards terrorism and relationships with Muslims and things like that, probably still, it's not like there's like a pre and post 9/11 kind of attitudes towards this thing, I think, for a lot of Western countries, right?
Yeah. Just going back to the footage, part of what sparked my interest in this is, like, I've been watching like some of the raw footage on YouTube where, like, now after many years, of course, basically what happened, I think, is there was whatever the investigation, they did a big review after the fact, and then they got, anyone who had any footage or any evidence on the day submitted it as part of that, and then they gave it to, whatever that review body is, and then that was subject to, like, that means it's subject then to like a freedom of information request. So this guy has gone and done that for all the videos that were supplied on the day, and he's gone and like upscaled them to like 4K. And so these original sort of, and they're still like, I don't want to oversell the quality of these videos. They're still.
Do you think he did it on a Silicon M3 computer or Snapdragon?
No. I think there's they're very watchable videos, and but I've only watched like maybe 2 or 3, because once you watch one, you then like you get sort of them up on YouTube, and then you can't help but watch the next one. But anyway, but what's really interesting about it is that they're often talking as they're filming, and it's in real time too. Or they're filming other people on the street, and you do get like some really natural, like that's the best bit, right? The people, like their reactions in real time as it happened, right? And it ranges from like even just and some of it's really like horrific, because you're seeing people and you're going, you're standing too close to that building, like you need to get away from it. Like that's what I'm thinking, right? I'm thinking you're too close, and you see the fireys, they're like getting ready to go up the building. Go, don't go in that fucking building. Like you just want to like shake them out of, like, don't do that. This guy, he's like, one of the videos, he's in this apartment, which is quite close to the World Trade Center, and he's filming. Well, first of all, he's like, it's just so odd to watch, and you will never capture this in any other setting. He's just like, I woke up and I thought there was like a ticker tape parade, because I saw all these like papers flying down, and I thought it was a ticker tape parade, and then I look out and I can see, there's a fire in the World Trade Center. Like, no idea about what's happened, just sees that there's a fire, and just almost not making fun of it, but like almost in a humorous way, saying, I thought it was a ticker tape parade, and then he's like looking at it, and then gradually he's like, oh wait, yeah, there's like big gashes in the building, like what happened, like why is that? And he's like doesn't have cable. His cable's not working, because I think he got it from the World Trade Center itself, like his footage. So didn't have access to the news or anything. And then like at some point he's literally saying to himself, I think I better go and have a shower now, and maybe go uptown or something. So this guy like should be panicking, but he's like, I'll just have a shower and go uptown. And then he also says on the video, he says, I wonder if I can, or maybe this is a different one, but it's like, I wonder if I'll be able to get in today I've got this meeting there. Like, I wonder if I'll get in, like I wonder if it'll be open. Like, no idea, like can't place it at all. And then he's like, the guy, the first guy in the apartment I was talking about, he he's literally looking at the building and he goes, oh, if this was like chopping down a tree, like I think if it was going to fall, it would fall that way. Like he's doing like the maths in his head about like where the building's going to fall if it falls. So I should be fine. And then the next thing you see is just him like fucking panicking because it has fallen. And it's very real, very sort of, it's not the actual footage of the building that landed with me so impactfully. It was actually all of that reaction that hit me.
Stranger than fiction. I mean, I was thinking to myself, when did the Blair Witch Project come out? Do you remember the Blair Witch Project?
99, yeah. I think that was 99.
99, right? And I feel like that was the first time that audiences were... A really popular movie broke through, which was this kind of camcorder selfie style first person thing, right? Like, it seems trivial now, but at the time it was a big thing, right? Like, it's essentially these people in the woods and they had the cameras, and essentially as an audience you were watching like these first person camera footage that you found, right? And I think that's also a part of it too, that like we weren't used to it back then, and seeing that first person footage was actually, we'd be just introduced to that in terms of entertainment. And it is that voyeurism aspect has kind of survived in the narrative ever since. It also brings about this idea for me, Andy, about like this darkness inside. Maybe darkness is the wrong word, but like I always think sometimes when fires are burning or bad things are happening, sometimes I sit back and I look at the response of people, and it does challenge me, right? There's a darkness to voyeurism, and I think that if people were like really, really honest with themselves, that there is a part of them that when bad things happen, when disasters happen, when conflict happens, a part of them is excited and entertained at the novelty, the drama of it all. And it's a weird feeling, right, to kind of like allow yourself to entertain those elements of the human behavior. But I think that plays a part too in terms of processing. Have you ever thought about that? Like when you see some kind of disaster or something, that actually there's a part of you within processing it that's actually excited and you want to see more?
Well, as someone who's just been watching them on YouTube, absolutely. Like the other thing is you read the comments, right? And the comments on these videos are like, oh yeah, I've seen this one. Oh, you've got to see this other. So it's like people who've done the whole, like this whole community. These get a lot of views. Like on YouTube, these are watched by millions and millions of people. And of course we were all glued to our TVs, not just on the night or the day or whatever, but the weeks and months afterwards. It was just this thing that we couldn't, there's like a new video which shows it from a different angle.
No one ever talks about it.
It's a car crash. It's like, you're driving along the road. What happens when there's a car crash on the other, like your multi-lane highway, and there's a car crash on the other carriageway that's traveling in the opposite direction, and for some reason there's always a traffic jam on the side of the road that is unaffected by the car crash because everyone's slowing down and they want to have a look. And it's human nature. I don't know that I would place it in a necessarily a negative light. Like I think it's human behavior, it's human nature, it's like one of the experiences of life, right?
There is, I struggle with it because I think that you're right, it's human nature, and it comes from probably just like an evolutionary psychology aspect of just wanting to know the news, right? And being stimulated by what's novel. But at the same time, I think it is a dark behavior because there's a part of you that enjoys like the drama rather than focusing on the impact, the negative impact to people, right, and the suffering.
Can I just chip in with one kind of anecdote, right? Again, because I watched all these videos, right? One of the thoughts I had is like, how would you be feeling in that setting? Like, do you film? Like, what if you were being filmed? Like, how do you judge it? And I kind of think, well, if these people weren't filming, you've not documented this history. And I think part of being like a Gawker, maybe even now 23 odd years after the fact, or however many years, is part of like retaining the memory of this. And if you don't have what's one of the most popular documentary categories on like the History Channel? It's like the World War II like war documentaries, war footage, all, like, and it's a similar thing, right? Where people want to just see the chaos. Like, it's like, oh, here's the footage of the fucking concentration camps. Like,
Yeah, I understand what you mean. I'm talking about more this kind of impulse that no one probably admits and no one talks about, because it's like when bad things happen, there's a part of you that wants them to continue because you're excited about the prospect of more novel drama, right?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is I think on this in this particular occasion, I think both in terms of people sitting and watching, yes, like they might have hung around to watch. I'm talking about you probably both people captured in some of these, you know, videos that you probably would be advising them, hey, you know, you might want to like go uptown like as quickly as possible, get as far away as you can. But no, they're like just standing there looking at the thing, right? Because it's mesmerizing. I'm also including myself today, right? Like, or whenever I was watching these videos, like, you know, again, after the fact, I don't think that would be true for anyone on this occasion. You know,
yeah, no.
Thinking, I hope there's another plane that comes, you know, like it was the horror of it, really. And a lot of distress.
No, it's just a little thing that I've been grappling with. And I actually have a theory why Trump is so popular, because I think it's the same effect. He had this, like, when he ran for office in his first term, the campaign for his first term, he had this little quote that was a meme and went viral, and just had him smirking at the camera, and he kind of had the captions, "Admit it, you want to see what it's going to be when I'm president," or something to that line, where he's like, "Admit it, you actually want to see how this turns out with me." And I think it's actually like a similar thing, where it's sometimes people want the drama to continue, and he knows that people want to see what happens. They want to watch the fire burn sometimes, and like that's the part that I was prodding and interrogating as well.
Yeah,
but to the point you said before too about Osama bin Laden, I remember at the time too, like he originally denied it. He originally denied involvement, right? And it was only actually a year later, I think it was in like 2002, that there was that, you know, famous video where he acknowledged it, that Al Qaeda took responsibility for the 9/11 attacks, right? As a you know, retribution to the US's involvement in the Middle East, right? So it took a whole year for it to fully kind of come out in the public. And why I was referring to the fact that this was a loss of innocence, right? Like a you know, coming of age thing for a lot of it too, because it made our generation like fess up to the idea that America has kind of blood on their hands as well. And this idea of like very like, you know, and previous generations would have probably known that from their involvement in the conflicts to date, like, you know, the Vietnam War and the Korean War and things like that. But for our generation, like it was all quiet, right? So you could kind of avoid this idea that Western supremacy, you know, and the trickiness of that. And then it kind of 9/11 launched you into this mindset or this period of reminding you that, okay, actually, like, it makes sense that every action has a reaction, and that actually this doesn't come from nowhere, right? But obviously it's incredibly evil. And it was the start of a little bit of that, right? It was the start of this kind of like oppressor narrative in some ways, right? And us grappling with that in the West.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this, like, you know, where would we place it kind of in the grand scheme of, you know, history? And like we maybe start off in the context of like, you know, pop culture, like Michael Jackson. The other one that comes to, the one that's more vivid for me in terms of like, say, celebrity deaths is actually Princess Diana, because I just remember that was like, that one just seemed to permeate like the culture at the time of her death, of being like, no one's death has matched her in like my lifetime at that point. But, you know, and that would have been, like I would have said, like up until September 11, that was like the biggest news event of my lifetime, right? Would have been Princess Diana's death, right? And then September 11 happened, and it was like that blew that one out the water. And actually, like in the context of history, like September 11 still lands because of how for one, it sort of shaped the world like subsequent to it, but also it's still that thing that's just shocking. Like, it's just more shocking than anything that's happened. It's more shocking even than the something like, say, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Like, many more deaths have resulted from that, but the shocking visuals, it just surpasses it. The only other event in my lifetime that I would put in the same stratosphere as September 11 is COVID. Is that shit, everything's like, this shit's getting real quick kind of thing back in March 2020.
COVID, definitely.
Obviously, COVID's a little bit different because it was a long, slow burn, and it burned into a big bushfire or raging, inferno that was more, probably a much bigger event in that grander scale, but like in terms of impact, yeah.
I think it's something unique about terrorism, right? And yes, there was an incredible amount of fear when COVID first came out, and you had that panic, you had that kind of feeling of, oh, maybe society could break down. Like, I never thought of this as a possibility, but actually, like, there's no food in my supermarket. I can't leave my house. Like, actually, there's a very thin line that
I can't go to my Darkness concert.
You know what I mean, man? Like, there's like and then you start to realize, oh, everything, polite society is hanging on by a thread here. Like, how loyal is a hungry dog, right? And so you start to kind of, that was the scary part, the fear. But it wasn't terror in that way. Like, I think the reason 9/11 and all this kind of stuff, especially for Western countries, is this idea of like, you're not safe. You're not safe. There are people out there that hate you, right? And their job is to have you live in fear.
Yeah,
terror,
I don't know that ever landed with me, to be honest, because I think maybe, I don't know what this says about me, or maybe it's just this was relevant for maybe some audiences, but not all. But like, the idea of that whole terror thing, like I always place that in the spectrum of, like,
it's easy to
far more chance of being like dying in a car crash kind of thing, right? So I've always placed it that
classic Australian thing, right? Like, I remember, fast forward to our homegrown one, right? So, sorry, homegrown is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. The Sydney Lint Cafe siege, right? So we had a issue in Sydney, and the Lint Chocolate Cafe was in Martin Place, which is kind of in the middle of our CBD, and there was a siege there where essentially like a terrorism kind of aspect to it held up, and there were people were held inside, including customers and staff, and it was messy, and there were deaths inside there until finally the police were able to extract and kill the perpetrator. But at the same time too, it was that feeling of like, okay, yeah, this can, like, the randomness of that, a lot of people are affected. I know a lot of Sydney-siders who were really affected by that. This idea that, in a cafe that you've gone to and you've got coffee, in your lunch break or whatever, in the heart of our city, this stuff can happen. And I remember actually in the lift, the week of that attack, and I think someone was saying that, oh my God, look, I can't believe there's this kind of stuff happening in Australia and Sydney, and this terrorism attack. And this one of our leaders, actually at the time, got really aggressive and turned around and was like, mate, it wasn't a terrorism attack, okay? Let's get that straight. It was just one crazy guy. Had nothing to do with terrorism. And I'm like, you're kidding me, right? Like, you're so desperate to write this off as a lone wolf attack that has nothing to do with his ideology, even though he had the flags, he had the stuff, he was kind of aligning. You're so desperate to think this is an isolated case and that you're safe, that you're becoming aggressive with someone else who's having a valid thought around this being a terrorism attack. And it just showed me like how fragile things are, right? Because we're so desperate all the time to think that all the problems are like in America. Not like they're not here, or they don't involve us, or we're not implicated in any of those kind of things.
We did have the Bali bombings in 2004, I think. And I think that was the next most significant terrorist incident post 9/11 at the time. I don't know, it might have been, at least for Western countries. And that did kill a lot of Australians, and it did land, I mean, yeah, maybe to put it a different way, it's probably, in terms of like deaths to population, it's probably in the same order of magnitude as what 9/11 was for America, right? So my recollection of like the early 2000s is that terrorism was very salient here too, in a way that, I think people probably were generally like afraid of the possibility of this stuff happening. But I think at the end of the day, like back to my comment before around the news, like to me, these terrorism things never landed because it's just not a high risk. Like it isn't for anyone in any country anywhere in the world apart from maybe Afghanistan and, places in almost, adjacent to war zones kind of thing. But like, I think just in terms of 9/11 resonating in the news, like in terms of like things you remember growing up, the terrorism thing isn't to me the key thing. For me, it comes down to those visuals, those like, what are you actually watching? So what do you see on the screen in front of you in a world where, I mean, there's a reason why, like, the famine in some part of Africa doesn't land in Western consciousness is because there's no footage to go with it to illustrate how impactful that is. But 9/11 is like the classic, like this is made for capturing your attention, and it's why people still watch it today. And it's hard to think of another event. I think with COVID, that maybe in a slightly different way was vivid for people because they lived it, but it had that same kind of, there was just this thing, what's the numbers every day? Like, what's going on? Like, when are we, it had that moment of kind of, probably it was different, but like in terms of big events, like those are probably the two that in my mind stick out.
It's definitely a moment. We spoke about the other week forgetting, right? Like our memory when these things happen. And, when you see this sensationalized, like people reading Osama bin Laden's like letter to America and kind of analyzing it, saying, all this stuff is actually really powerful and this guy's like making a lot of sense. I feel the same way. I feel like people just have forgotten 9/11 or haven't engaged with the history of it and what's happened, right? We're so quick to move on from these things that we forget.
Oh, I don't know. I agree with that. I think, and maybe I reflect on this as having been to the 9/11 memorial last year in America. I think at the site basically, it's this revered site. As you see all the, you don't walk past a fire engine sort of, a fire station, in Manhattan without outside there being just this, like, I mean, that for the city particularly, like I get that, maybe we sort of all move on or whatever, but I definitely, like, I just think it's implanted itself into the consciousness of the actual day and the events. And I think, maybe what you're referring to is the political kind of lessons or whatever, but I don't think there were like universally agreed lessons from 9/11. Like, in fact, I think you can take any group of Americans and find those people who would, like, for just about like polar opposite views, say America's response to 9/11 proves my side's right, and the opposite would say it proves my side's right. Like, you had from pretty much the get-go, protest movements around like the subsequent invasion of Afghanistan, Iraq, and all that. Like, there was less so Afghanistan, but certainly Iraq. And you had a lot of people now who would say, this proves it was a mistake. All we did was radicalize new, militants and all that, So I don't know that when, if that's what you're talking about, maybe I've got you wrong, but
I'm going back to this idea of, how we pretty much said, if you have meaningfully engaged in the impacts of a conflict, like going to the Holocaust Museum or whatever it is, or you don't act in a way that glamorizes or kind of takes a strong side on these things, right? Without putting a bit of nuance into it. And I think that this idea of almost romanticizing the freedom fighter is akin to that. It's a lack of kind of trying to remember or understand 9/11. And I do think that like, maybe I guarantee you're right around, New Yorkers and the reverence and all that kind of stuff, especially around first responder culture there is very high and all that business. But I think in general, like the youth, right? Are we losing some of that? That's
yeah,
what I mean.
I don't think so. I think if and I'm sort of trying to read between the lines, but I get the sense you're sort of transplanting 9/11 to, what's going on over in Israel, Palestine.
No, I'm like there's a direct kind of viral thing of people, younger people, Gen Zs and stuff, reading and looking at Osama bin Laden's letter to America and saying this guy is making a lot of sense and almost like glamorizing some of his work and his ideology. And I'm saying that can't exist when you've properly engaged with the impacts of something like 9/11, which he is directly responsible for. So I'm not talking about transplanting attitudes towards terrorism and responses and counter terrorism measures. I'm talking about this idea of understanding the reality of these conflicts and taking a position.
I've not heard of this as a thing, so I'll go out on a limb and say I'd be very, very shocked if there's many people, like young people, who maybe weren't alive during 9/11 or were very young or whatever, who've rediscovered it and kind of formed a view that Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, they're pretty good. Like I think there's a lot of young people who we talked about kafirs who buy into that kind of. But then I remember that being a thing in 2008 when I was in Europe. Like there were heaps of people wearing those scarves. It was like more a fashion thing, right? I think Israel Palestine. I think there's definitely a lot of like sympathy or empathy among kind of younger people in the West for Palestinians and whatever. But I don't think. And I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm just saying I don't think. I'd say it's akin to the whole like neo-Nazi, like so some segment of the population for whatever weird bizarre reason like comes to the conclusion that hey, Hitler was like on the right track with that whole thing, right? But I don't think that's like the mainstream. I don't know. I'm happy to consider any, because I'm not across this. I'm not like familiar with this concept, so
No.
Yeah.
I'm pointing out similarities, right, with what we spoke about, attitudes towards, say, like the Holocaust or something. And I'm not saying it's a mainstream thing, but I also think that if you are young and you don't really understand 9/11, then it's going to be easier for you to engage with some of these things.
I think probably most young people's first introduction to 9/11 is literally the footage, right? Because it is so, it's still like today, like I don't think, well, probably in some ways what makes it ordinary now is that like CGI is so good that we see that in like Transformers and stuff, I don't know whatever movies, like the Marvel films, like what's so unusual. But I think back in that time, you certainly didn't have CGI that looked like that. But there must be something in it. I mean, we've talked about AI in general, but like in our Adults Only episode, we talked about AI pornography, right? And I had a thought after the fact. I thought, is it relevant if it's real? Like, is it purely just the visual thing? Like, is that all you need? Or is it the knowledge that it's fake? Does that, like, what impact does that have? And I wonder if it's like the same here. Like, are we training young people to not care about if something's real or not? Like, because for me, like the fact that you see this footage of this real building that's collapsing and has a plane into it or whatever, that matters. Like,
of course it matters.
But I think for young people, it matters less. I do think that's a change.
It's like the whole based on a true story thing, right? Like that matters.
Yeah, kind of. But it matters less to young people is what I'm saying. So, well, sorry, I'm saying that I'm speculating that it matters less. So my sample of one is that, like, I can't remember how it came out, but like I ended up having a conversation with my son about 9/11 and what happened.
Awesome.
And I was expecting it to be, it would just be this mind blown kind of thing, right? But it kind of wasn't. Like he even, like, we watched the videos together, like, because I thought, well, he's going to see it. Like he's got this phone and he's watching YouTube and all this stuff. So like, if he's going to see it, he's going to see it. And he was asking questions about it. So I thought, well, he's probably already seen it already. So we watched it together and like he was just sort of, oh, okay. Like it was kind of, it didn't impact him. So I guess that's why I'm speculating. Like, well, maybe it did impact him, but maybe it wasn't necessarily, maybe to your earlier point, 16 is kind of the age where you need to be to really truly understand it. Maybe he's too young, but
did he understand what was happening? Do you think?
Yeah, like he understands. Well, he understands that. Like, there's no part of it that I sugarcoated. Like this, it wasn't like, oh yes, and this plane. It was actually wasn't a real plane. There was no people on it. It was, in this building, yes, they just assembled this to have, no, it was like, this is a fucking building with thousands of people dead. Like, so it was real and vivid.
So what did you expect? Like, did you have any preconceived ideas of how he would react?
I just thought he would, almost to your point before around how we're kind of drawn to drama, or we're drawn to, like, we have this kind of like, oh, so what happens next? And that surprised me that there wasn't that kind of, there was a little bit of disinterestedness going on. He was asking me questions, so he must have had some interest in it, but less so about the footage, or more about, maybe it was just like this thing that he learnt about, or that he had some exposure to, and there was just this minor curiosity he had, but like I just expected that curiosity to be a bit bigger.
Maybe it's like, when you where some people hate documentaries because it's in black and white, like footage of the the First World War. They just like, they can't engage with it because it's too lo-fi. Maybe it's something like that as well, whereas like it's not engaging enough by modern standards.
I think it could be that, but there is this other thing. Like, have you ever heard of the concept of the experience machine?
I have, yeah.
So this is, for our listeners who are unfamiliar, this is like a thought experiment by Robert Nozick, whose book, like, put it out in his book, Anarchy State and Utopia. But basically, it's like the Matrix, right, kind of thing. So it's basically
that in the brain.
Yeah, so it's just the proposition is that if you're given the choice to live your real life with all warts and all, like the good and the bad, but you're real, you actually have a real life, or you could essentially have like this perfect simulation and you couldn't tell the difference. And you could, I don't know, you could choose to be a rock star, or like travel the world, or whatever dream you come up with, right? The proposition of under the experience machine is that, of course, like people would choose to live, to really, like, they'd hate the idea of being in the Matrix, right? But one of the things that with that, because that thought experiment's from like the 70s, is that they've done research on this, that like over time, the proportion of the population who indicate that they would choose the real life has actually declined. And so more people, like younger people, are saying, oh no, I'd totally take up the experience machine. That sounds good. And I wonder if it's something to do with that. Like it's that, like where there's just sort of, for younger people, there's more like, just what's real and not real matters less. Anyway,
I think especially for like gamers and culture like that too, right? Like, and I just think that the younger generation are used to a higher quality of escapism than maybe generations gone by, because technology has become so good at creating a third world, a second world, or whatever, that it's just so captivating. Like I kind of wonder. So I actually recently, we're about to go on a family trip, and I was talking to my kids about a Game Boy that I had when I was a kid. I don't know did you have a Game Boy?
I did have a Game Boy. That missed me.
Yeah, so I had a Game Boy. The original Game Boy, like the grey one it was just in monochrome and had a little cartridge on the back, and you used to play Tetris and different things like that. Very, very basic. And I was talking to my son about it. He's like, what is this? Like, it looks like, it's black and white, and, So I actually bought an emulator one. So I've bought him like a little Game Boy that essentially emulates like 14 different consoles. Like you can play PSP games and Game Boy games and all these different systems, right? And arcade games. It has over 15,000 games on it. It has 15,000 games. And I bought it because I wanted him to kind of experience like what some of these games were. And part of me was really curious to see whether like the addictiveness and the tactile nature of some of these games would still land in like a modern environment. So I've just got it for them, and they're like exploring it, and I'm keen to see, right? Like, is it actually like trying to play Led Zeppelin and hoping your kid likes it, right? Or was there some magic to it? I do wonder, right? The charm of games versus this like immersibility, because I think we are on the cusp of. Is happening slower than I thought. I remember watching a movie. Have you seen the movie Lawnmower Man?
No, I haven't.
Basically, it's like it was a movie in the 90s, and it was about virtual reality and how virtual reality kind of like took over the world and took over like consciousness. And I thought we'd be there by now. I remember watching that video. I'm like, oh yeah. And by the time like we're grown up, we're going to be like virtual beings It's taken a bit longer, but I do feel like it's coming.
So one final question for you before we wrap it up. Excluding kind of wars, do you think they're in our lifetime? Do you think they're like on the assumption that 9/11 was the most shocking thing we've lived through in terms, apart from say COVID, which I think you distinguish for different reasons, but as a like literally like a moment, like a 24-hour moment of craziness or shocking events, do you think we'll have in our lifetime something that will surpass it, excluding wars?
Yeah, I think that's I mean, I guess that's the thing, that you can't really imagine it, right? I think we're probably.
Or what would it be? Maybe to like give me like a thought experiment of what such an event could be.
What would be the most devastating event?
Or just like what would be something like that could surpass that? Like what would be its characteristics?
I think the characteristics would be a blend of maliciousness and the worst parts of humanity, which are on show in something like a 9/11, where this is like man-on-man violence, like man is wolf to man, and something more fundamental to our biology, like a pandemic, right? So like all these like doomsday scenarios where, you know, perhaps like The Walking Dead, right? Like the zombie apocalypse, or perhaps that for some reason every man becomes like infertile overnight and or woman, right? And all of a sudden we like, as a species, we have an existential threat on us. Because we can no longer reproduce. So we're trying to find out how to, and there are people that are controlling that and stuff like that. It'd be something, to my mind, a little bit like that, or something a little bit less sci-fi, if I think it might be what you're looking for. I do think we're probably sleeping on like nuclear attack. So I think it's something like that probably.
Yeah, I mean, well, nuclear attack presumably would precipitate some kind of
like a Mad Max scenario, right?
Yeah, okay, so like, for me, what made 9/11 unique wasn't necessarily the scale of its actual impact, because its actual impact was probably quite small, really. Its actual impact was a couple of thousand dead, plus, you know, some devastation in the city, like from a like building sense, right?
Well,
and that sounds terrible, like as a quote, a soundbite, right? Oh, it was only a couple of thousand. Of course, it was big, but like.
More people die of the cold, Andy, every year.
Well, you know, more people died of the COVID vaccine, apparently, but well, there's probably
well, not apparently,
but less than that were saved by the vaccine. That's for sure. But
agree.
Depending on which cohort you choose, we won't go there.
Those collegiate athletes got hit rough, didn't they?
So I don't think it's the impact in an absolute sense. It's more the shockingness. It's got to be that. I don't know. So it's in some ways, like, I know you mentioned Trump, like in some ways that like the shockingness of Trump becoming president and possibly becoming president again is in that kind of category. But like, I mean, that can't match it. For me, I don't know that, like, now we've seen 9/11, I don't know that visually, but the visual kind of shockingness and at least my own experience of it, like where that bang, 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 this like unfolding event in real time, I would struggle to think, like, I'm not sure we will have that again, especially like, because now we're kind of lost our virginity to that sort of
But I think like
thing,
people,
right?
It's generational though, Andy. Like I think people, you know, if you ever talk to someone, I mean, not talk to someone, but I haven't, but like I imagine if you talk to someone who witnessed JFK, right, being assassinated and like taking a headshot, right? It's things like that too, you know, that like, again, it's not, that's a prime example of what you mean by it's like there's not a lot of body bags at the end of it. It's not a lot of human casualty, but it's such a shocking thing to witness, you know, the president being shot in the head, like in front of a live audience, right? Like
for that, it would have been the shock too, right? Of the president is dead, right? So when we were both born well after that actually happened, and our whole lives that had happened. So there's no shock. Exactly. There's no way that could shock us. But like,
so my point is like people forget, right? And it's generational. So the next thing that comes along for people who haven't experienced 9/11 like you and I have, it doesn't matter that 9/11 has existed because it'll be new for them. The Holocaust, right? Like concentration camp, like it's hard to top that.
We will certainly have like some sort of catastrophe in our lifetime that's bigger than 9/11. In fact, we already have had multiple that are bigger than 9/11. But like for me, it's more just that sudden kind of jarring, like Because even COVID wasn't jarring in the same way as 9/11 was, even though COVID ran our lives in a far more profound way. But like, it was like this slow burn, whereas this was just this bam, it's happened, and it's like... I'm not sure we will have that, especially now that everything is we're so used to like this. Yeah. Something that can kind of shock us. But anyway, I think
Can I make a prediction?
Yeah.
I'll make a prediction that when AI is fully integrated into the driver's seat and we have like a straight through processing Amazon that doesn't require any human intervention, I predict that there will be an AI cock-up where like every man, woman and child in a whole country receives a dildo or a wrong order. And it's like a cultural moment where like that's the day that the AI took over and sent everyone black dildos, like every man, woman and child in like America or Yugoslavia or something.
All right. Well, on that note, I'll leave you to your dildo planning
because they run the production.